The critics, the YouTubers, the box office, and probably even you are wrong about Kick-Ass 2. The original Kick-Ass is the beloved original take on a realistic superhero movie long before we had 100 modern-day gimmicky adaptations of what the world would really be like if we actually had mass vigilantes. An R-rated comic book character outside the reigns of Marvel or DC being adapted into a gritty, violent comedy seemed impossible over 6 years before Deadpool made it commonplace. After a massive box office success, amazing ratings, and even Universal buying the IP, it seemed inevitable that this was going to be a serious franchise to maybe even rival some of the original stars, until the sequel came out. This is where it all fell apart, and I'm going to tell you why everyone is wrong about this movie and why Kick-Ass 2 isn't anywhere near a 33% rating. After making a video on the original Kick-Ass and loving it just like everyone else, I made a video on it comparing it to modern movies today and just giving it the flowers it deserves. After that, I rewatched the sequel for the first time in a decade and I loved it just as much as the first one. So I did what anyone else would do after wondering if a Kick-Ass 3 was in the works, and I started researching what everyone thought of this movie. And that's where I was caught completely off guard. First off, the critic ratings. I mentioned earlier that Kick-Ass 2 had a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes and not much better on some other review sites. I thought I was going crazy, but after looking it up on YouTube to see what people thought of it there were hundreds of videos explaining why this movie absolutely sucked and how it was the worst thing to ever happen to modern day cinema. If you have not seen Kick-Ass, you 100% should, as it is an essential movie. And if you haven't seen Kick-Ass 2, I encourage you to go watch it on your own terms without being influenced to hate it by other people. If you have seen Kick-Ass 2 though, I just refuse to believe that you can hate it as much as these people are trying to make it seem. And I'm going to go through the critic reviews, the YouTube video essays, and even the box office and prove them wrong one by one. And I'm going to show you how this unexpectedly became one of the most underrated movies I have ever seen, and how it's not cringe, it's not misogynistic, and it's not completely dependent on cheap shock value. Now, before we get into the YouTube video essays that weekly explain why they don't like Kick-Ass 2, we're going to be looking at the critic reviews. If you've ever wanted to write no effort one-sentence reviews for movies, consider being a Rotten Tomatoes professional movie reviewer. Solve a crossword puzzle, call grandma, do whatever you like, but don't watch this movie. Or, oh dear, where to begin? How about everywhere? How about beginning anywhere, Kevin? Or my favorite review, a rather dispiriting affair. So as you guys can see here, it seems like the older audience reviewing these movies don't love our Kick-Ass sequel, and they can't even really explain why. Also, in case you're wondering why I'm not clicking to go to the full review and see their full thoughts, trust me, I've tried and it just doesn't work. So either they've taken down the review, which is a possibility since it's been over 10 years, or they just never wrote a full-length review in the first place. Jenny Ellie says, although the film has the cheap veneer of female empowerment that came from having a girl assassin, it is rotten with misogyny. So okay, we actually have something to work with here. Jenny thinks that this movie is misogynistic, and that is why she rated it super low. See, I don't like Korra, I think Rey is a bit of a Mary Sue, and I think Leia is annoying, and Captain Marvel is a shoehorned, overpowered character. So I'm probably exactly the person that she's talking about when they're talking about misogynistic movies, but I don't think any of these things about Hit Girl. And she's the best character in this entire movie. She isn't played for jokes, she is literally the most powerful superhero since her dad died, and half the movie is her training our male main character. She does have some high school boy problems, which we will talk about a bit later, but I don't think a high school freshman girl having teenage trauma is really the epitome of misogyny. The second strongest character in the entire movie, Mother Russia, is also a serious woman character who kills multiple people and is praised several times by her male counterparts. I really don't know how you could see this and think it's overly male dominated, or that they're playing into harmful female stereotypes. To me, it seems like it's the literal complete opposite. Both Hit Girl and Mother Russia play more into Toph from Avatar or Katniss from Hunger Games kind of mold, where they're strong woman characters, but it feels earned and they feel naturally stronger than our male characters based off things like good writing and good backstory. I don't know what Jenny wanted here, but making the two strongest characters women and then having a significant portion of the final battle being just about them and actually making it more enjoyable to watch than our male main characters is just the very opposite of what she's trying to portray here in this review. The next few reviews are different, but almost say the exact same thing, and that is that they didn't like all the violence. When I was watching this movie before I looked up what anyone had to say about it, I didn't notice the violence or think it was overly gruesome or anything like that, and I don't know if 2013 was just a completely different time for movies, but everyone in these reviews are talking about how stabbing people and showing on-screen deaths is just too far. Now, I actually would agree with this if we were watching Human Centipede and they were showing someone's head getting blown off or something, but that just doesn't happen here. And by today's standards, it just has normal violence, so I don't know what everyone's problem is. This review reads, "It's a bumpy ride to the final heroes vs villains melee, and the film is frequently stopped dead by meaty chunks of exposition." Now, this at least gives us a few things to work with. Instead of just complaining the movie's bad or saying it's violent, Mark says it drags down a bit until the finale, and that it has big chunks of exposition dragging everything down. While I don't agree with this, it at least sets us up with a specific problem that we can work to prove wrong. So let's look at some of the more specific problems and then go over the general plot narratives these reviewers and YouTubers have issues with. First of all, the humor. I felt like I was in a parallel universe after watching YouTube video essays on this movie, and all of them talked about the cringy humor. Kick-Ass 2 is a funny movie, and while that is subjective, we can look over some of the jokes and see what everyone thinks about this right now. And I'm not joking either. You guys can go right now to any review site, any YouTube review, anything, and they're all going to say the same exact thing about how this movie isn't funny and how all the jokes land flat. We'll talk more about the main villain later, but one of the first humorous moments is when Chris D'Amico kills his mom by kicking her tanning bed after she tried to shut down all of his supervillain activity. Now, this is a huge complaint among people, and they say that he's a badly written, immature antagonist and nothing is planned out for him, and that he just kind of does whatever he feels like. Personally, I don't know what everyone was expecting to see in Kick-Ass 2, but I didn't think that we were going to see Thanos debating the moral trade-offs of each of his victims, but apparently the video essay YouTubers and movie reviewers were expecting Kick-Ass to face off against like Heath Ledger's Joker or Magneto or something like that. Chris D'Amico dons his mom's BDSM lingerie and officially becomes the motherfucker. And again, I don't know if I'm just easily impressed, but that come on guys, that's funny. I don't want every single villain to be like Killmonger avenging his enslaved ancestors, and sometimes you just need a little motherfucker in there wearing his mom's lingerie. There's a moment a little later on where Chris is about to get beat up by a black guy in his gym, and he instead decides to hire him and call him Black Death fittingly. Now again, I don't know if I'm the problem here, but this was funny. He does this a few more times throughout the movie while building his team, where he gives each character a racist stereotype, like Kung Fu Man for the Asian guy and Mother Russia for the Russian woman, and I've seen so many reviews say that these are cheap, racist, cringy moments that drag down the whole movie. These people have got to be like Albert Einstein or Winston Churchill or something, because how do you go into Kick-Ass 2 and not think the mother effer hiring Black Death and Kung Fu Man is cringy? You guys will have to tell me in the comments if I'm in the wrong or if everyone else is, because I'm not apologizing for thinking this is actually written really well and it's funny. It's kind of the entire point of his character that he's not that clever or smart, and he just makes things up as he goes along. I've mostly just went over the jokes with the main villain, and that's because that's just how he is. He doesn't care too much about any of that stuff as long as he kills Kick-Ass, which that's kind of just a funny character setup in the first place. But there are some other funny moments with some other more expected characters, like Kick-Ass's friend tells a long-winded Batman-esque story about how his parents died and it forced him to become a superhero, and it turns out that none of that is true and he just wanted to have a cool backstory. Several moments like that happen throughout the story, and that's the humor I expect and that I want from this movie. And apparently I am not on the same page as most of the audience here. Another big thing I've seen several people complain about is that the Jim Carrey character's dog bites people in the groin area, and a lot of people didn't find that funny. Now, I agree this isn't the craziest comedy skit ever, but it's not really even played for laughs in the movie, and that's kind of just how the dog attacks people. I don't understand why this is such a big deal to these people. Either the dog isn't John Wick and he's not going to like no-scope people in the throat, and he's obviously a trained military canine dog, so he's just doing what he knows. Also, I've seen dogs do this in real life, so I think these reviewers thought that this was like made up for the movie, which makes no sense at all. It's whatever though, the dog thing isn't that important, but it goes to show that people like freaking out about every single thing and complaining for every reason. After reading and watching these reviews, it seems like they're just making stuff up to complain about. I mean, are we really that mad about a K9 dog biting someone's dick? I would ask all of these people one question if I had the chance, and that is, what did you expect by walking into a kick-ass movie? Did everyone think they were going to see like Oppenheimer or something? Now, there is actually one critique I do agree with, and I think it does weaken the movie a lot, but first I want to talk about their main complaints, and that is the characters. Apparently, people did not like Hit Girl, Chris D'Amico, and Kick-Ass's new superhero squad as much as they liked the cast of the original movie. On the opposite side of things though, one of the biggest points is that they like Jim Carrey's character a little too much, and that they're sad that he didn't play a bigger part. While these complaints make a little more sense than complaining about the humor, I'm still not sure why anyone would think this way. The first movie had Kick-Ass, Hit Girl, Big Daddy, Chris D'Amico, and Chris's father as the main villain, and when Big Daddy and Chris's dad die in a sequel, it's probably not going to be about those characters, and it's going to be about the characters that are still alive. If you're walking into a movie expecting to see Big Daddy or expecting to see the same mobster villain as the first one, you're probably obviously going to be disappointed. And I promise you guys, I'm not making this up just to have a reason to complain. If you go look yourselves, a huge amount of people are complaining that they don't like Kick-Ass and Hit Girl being at center stage, and they would rather have more side characters from the first one, or that they'd rather have Jim Carrey's character have a way bigger role. I'm going to say something a little wild here, so try and stay with me. I'm seeing the Kick-Ass movie for Kick-Ass, and what should be obvious here but apparently is not, I wasn't surprised to see the only other real superhero in the movie a lot, and I wasn't surprised to see the villain that they teased in the original make an appearance in the sequel. Saying all of this out loud makes it seem like the most obvious thing in the world, and I keep feeling like people are going to think I'm just making all of these criticisms up to react to. And for me, it seems like kind of a hot take after reading all the reviews, but I actually didn't mind Colonel Stars, who was Carrey's character, not having 45 minutes of runtime in the movie, and I felt like he served his purpose and then had a graceful exit. I liked Kick-Ass's little group of heroes here that he assembled, and I actually really liked Chris's group of supervillains on the opposite side. There is one thing a lot of people mentioned which actually is valid though, and that is Kick-Ass's superhero girlfriend. She does kind of come out of nowhere, and there is a bit of an inappropriate joke with her that has to do with Chris attempting to like assault her, and I can see where people are coming from when they say that her character isn't the best written, but while watching Kick-Ass 2, I didn't really notice any of this, and it didn't seem too out of place. But the haters kind of have a point with her. It didn't ruin the movie for me, and I didn't really think she was a net negative, but if you cut her out, you wouldn't really miss her. Overall though, I don't think you should complain about the side characters not getting as much screen time as our main heroes, and I think that should probably be well expected in like any movie. I think all of the side heroes and villains were actually really interesting and well written, and it might be a really unique case of them being too good to the point where people wanted more of them instead of following the main story. I don't think it's a bad thing where everyone you're following feels like a high point, and I think it only makes everything better, which is what everyone should be feeling about that situation. Hit Girl also gets a ton of criticism here too, with people saying it's not as cute that she is a superhero now that she's older, and that she isn't as fun or good as she was in the original. First of all, that is misogynistic, and it's fun to see her run around the city outmatching almost everyone because she was trained by the only real superhero in this entire franchise. She's definitely a strong point throughout this whole thing, and if you don't like watching Hit Girl, what could you possibly be watching Kick-Ass for? None of this criticism so far is valid enough to make this even close to a bad movie. We have a few valid points here and there, but you could do that for literally any show or movie ever, and it's kind of just like a foresight kind of thing. If someone really wanted to convince you it's not a good story, they would start with the plot, since it's kind of a mixed bag. Instead of a grounded linear storyline, Kick-Ass 2 has kind of a typical huge battle it builds up to like most of the other cookie cutter movies we have today, and it almost feels like it's the ending of an entire trilogy, to the point where I would kind of actually be curious what story they would use if they did end up making Kick-Ass 3, and I don't think this is really an issue. I could see see why people would want a smaller scale final battle if it was really confusing and all over the place, but it's really narrowed down into two really good fights. Hit Girl and Mother Russia had the real fight where both of them are highly skilled and they're using their version of superpowers, where the Russian has crazy strength ripping everything apart, and Hit Girl is using all of her Batman gadgets plus her training from Big Daddy. Kick-Ass and Chris have the main battle though, which is way less serious than the other one, and you can tell they're nowhere near Hit Girl's skill level, even with all of their training throughout the movies. They had this joke earlier where Chris installed a shark pit into his lair, but he didn't know what kind of water to use and has seemingly killed the shark. Which again, I think it's a funny situation, but whatever you do, do not ask the YouTube video essay guys to give you their thoughts, or they will just say it's cringe and corny. Anyways, Chris loses the final fight to Kick-Ass, and Dave actually decides to be the bigger person and save him, which I think is a perfect representation of both their characters. It fails though, and Chris falls down from the rooftop to get eaten by said shark from earlier. Overall, I think it's a pretty good ending, and I liked all the action, and it is nowhere near a letdown like some of these reviews would make it seem. Also, I'm getting into dangerous territory here, but it might even be more exciting than the original's ending. There's a lot more going on, and I actually like the parallels of the huge skill gap between Hit Girl and pretty much everyone else on the battlefield. Many of the comments were saying it leads to nothing and that the ending was kind of a nothing burger, and like many of the other quote-unquote critiques, I don't think this makes any sense. Both the main characters have an amazing final fight that ends with them winning and destroying the supervillain group that has been being built all movie, so I'm not really sure what those reviewers wanted for an ending here. Now we can go over, I think, the only real problem with the movie, and you guys can decide if it's actually a real issue. If you read all of the reviews and watch all of the videos, between all the complaining and nonsense, a lot of them mention that the Hit Girl B-plot of her learning to fit in without her dad drags on and cheapens the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, it's pretty much like a Mean Girls kind of situation where she's making friends after deciding to give up being Hit Girl, and they eventually betray her, and it's just petty like high school problems. I actually thought the school aspect wasn't bad here, but after thinking back on the movie, I think that would be the most annoying thing to rewatch. It isn't like obnoxiously bad or anything, but I think back in 2013, audiences were a little sick of seeing the personal side of superheroes, since that was kind of in like a ton of movies back then. I'll give this one to the haters. They did kind of fumble that part, but I think it is extremely exaggerated on how bad it is, and I'd love anyone else's opinion on if this truly ruins the whole movie. Now, I want to go over a few of the miscellaneous reasons that don't really have to do a lot with the actual movie too much, but people still cite it for the movie being bad. First of all, the original Kick-Ass was directed by Matthew Vaughn, and all credit to him, he really made the movie feel alive and baked in the magic that you get with these original characters. He has an entire story with this production and pretty much funded it off of random investors and took a huge risk. It paid off, but he didn't return to direct the sequel, and the entire IP got bought out by Universal. Now, I don't really know too much about Matthew Vaughn, but it seems like he has a Zack Snyder kind of cult following because people were really mad that he wasn't directing the sequel. It also had the Universal tag on Kick-Ass 2, so people naturally thought it was going to be more formulaic and less of an original thing since it comes from a huge company. Now, I'm going to say another thing that might sound a little crazy to some of the diehard fans, but I personally don't care who directs the movie, and I also don't care if Universal owns it. For the most part, unless it's like Avengers Infinity War or something, you don't really need a genius to make a good comic book movie, especially if it's just an adaptation, and I think that's kind of shown here. Kick-Ass 2 still has the environment and the feeling of the first one, and I don't think it has any negative effects from being bought out by Universal or by using a different director, but it is more ammo for people who dislike it to list out reasons for why it's bad. The box office also has a bit of extra lore than what meets the eye, and Kick-Ass 2 made $60 million off a $30 million budget, which is similar to the $90 million the original made off its $30 million budget. The only problem was Kick-Ass 2 was the most pirated movie of the entire year and one of the most pirated movies ever. I don't know what happened this year or if like new technology came out, but this movie got absolutely destroyed. The actors talked about this in response to questions about the Kick-Ass 3, and it's truly a shame we won't get that movie because of all the rampant stealing. Now, I may or may not have watched this movie for the first time on the shady site, like probably a lot of you guys, and it got so bad for it that it had an anti-piracy awareness video at the end of the movie, which I have never seen before. People will point to the box office numbers as another reason to discredit the sequel, but without these negative outside factors, I'm sure it would have looked a lot more like the success of the original. So it is time to make a decision for yourself. Are you on the vast majority side where you think this is a 30% fresh movie, which is a solid 3 out of 10, or do you think it's a fun, less serious sequel that gives us more than enough for it to be enjoyable? I think some of the criticism makes sense, and while I personally enjoyed this movie just as much as the first one, I think it should be somewhere in the high 7 to an 8 range instead of the abysmal ratings it has now. Remember to let me know what you guys think in the comments. I read all of them and I'm really interested on this topic. Also, if you enjoy superhero content about movies and shows and all of that, feel free to sub up and check out some of these other bangers off of my channel right now if you need more superhero slop to watch.